Hi, I'm Jim Perdue of Perdue Chicken. Unlike our competitor, who's gone back to feeding their chickens antibiotics, we at Perdue will remain no antibiotics ever. No antibiotics ever because we raise our chickens in a healthy environment, so they don't need them. No antibiotics ever takes more time and money, but it's the right thing to do. So when you buy chicken, look for the Perdue label to make sure your chicken is no antibiotics ever. Get the facts at Perdue.com.
Most of us know you can't trust politicians, but then one comes along who's like, I'm gonna look out for you. Like Jose Huizar. He grew up in a working-class Latinx neighborhood in LA, and then he turned on the community that raised him. From Neon Hum Media and LA Taco, this is The Sellout, a podcast about a politician arrested by the FBI for allegedly operating a criminal enterprise out of City Hall. I'm Mariah Castañeda. Subscribe now.
To get the Crime Writers on Aftershow right now, go to patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And this week, a black teenager dies from a shotgun blast during a traffic stop. Was it really an accident or something worse? We'll talk about the podcast series Mississippi Goddam from Reveal. Plus, a look at the troubled life of a young Hollywood starlet who died in the presence of her controlling husband. We'll review What Happened, Brittney Murphy from HBO Max. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of the These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Buenas tardes, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of Dead on Deadline, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello, and also scooter stunt driver. My scooter appeared in a public access Halloween special this week, so I'm adding that to my resume.
I heard and I actually saw that, and it's very exciting. And finally, our captain of woke cynicism, the author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of the Strange Arrivals podcast from iHeart, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
Good morning, Rebecca.
Yeah, we are taping in the morning this morning, which, by the way, for the record, is not why Kevin sounds this way. Kevin?
Oh, I've got some kind of cold, guys.
And we should say you were tested. It is not the COVID.
I took 2 tests this week.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm negative, but I'm going to sound a little rough today.
My entire family sounds like that, except for me.
Yeah.
And they got tested too. It's just
It's going around. Yeah. You're like Ira Glass on every other episode of This American Life.
Yeah, right. After being secluded from everybody and not getting anything.
That's right. You had to go on a plane.
Yeah.
And be exposed to some people and their germs. So we'll talk about that in the after show, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we have a lot to do today, so we should just get right to it. All right?
Okay.
All right. Leading off.
He knew how to safely handle firearms, and driving around with a loaded shotgun, his dad says Billy Joe would have never done that. Never. Let alone grabbing a weapon during a police stop. They can't believe that at all.
In 2008, high school football star Billy Joe Johnson was pulled over for speeding in Lucedale, Mississippi. Moments later, the officer radioed that the black teen had killed himself with a shotgun. A grand jury later ruled that Johnson died accidentally while moving the gun and found no wrongdoing by the police.
The traffic stop wasn't captured on video, and there were no eyewitnesses. What I did know, his family didn't believe the official version, and they felt ignored by the system. His death didn't make any sense to them, and it didn't make any sense to me either.
Making good on an old promise to look into the story, reporter Al Letson went to Lucedale and re-examined the case file. He found the family's distrust of the official story is rooted in America's long history of violence against people of color and cover-ups by law enforcement in the Deep South.
When you guys come along, I felt the same way. That's why I said, if you guys are not going to help us, then I'm not fixing to give over nothing. Because I don't want to keep doing this over and over, and we're not getting nowhere.
The PRX investigative podcast Reveal is out with an 8-part series called Mississippi Goddam, the Ballad of Billy Joe Johnson. Letson, along with reporter Jonathan Jones, pokes at the conclusion the teen's death was an accident. He also places Johnson's story squarely within the reckoning of civil rights and justice in America. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from the first 3 episodes of Mississippi Goddam.
Goddamn.
So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down review.
That's the way you keep saying it. Mississippi, goddamn.
Well, it's how Nina Simone says it in her iconic civil rights era song. I should mention that to listeners. It is a Nina Simone song that this podcast is named after, and I think a really great framing for the podcast. Speaking of framing, Toby, Al Letson does start the podcast with something a couple of our listeners noted that I liked, but I guess a couple of you noted as well, and a couple of our listeners did. He frames it as sort of a non-true crime podcast at the start, that he's not going to be exploiting this story for, listens, likes, fame, whatever. I don't think that Reveal necessarily does that anyway. How did that strike you, that he sort of started the podcast that way?
Why did you like it?
I guess it didn't strike me as unnecessary. I think that what Al was trying to do here was basically say, well, I don't know. I guess I can't really have an answer for that question, to be completely honest with you.
Because I kind of felt, and I think we had a similar thing about the Orange Tree thing, where they're like, we're not going to be one of those podcasts that's this, that, or the other thing. It's like, just do it. And by saying this isn't like a normal true. There's been plenty of podcasts that we've reviewed that sort of fit his criteria for what he's doing. And I just kind of feel like that kind of disclaimer it's not really a slam, because I don't think he's singling anybody out or whatever, but I think it's trying to set the podcast apart in a way that it doesn't necessarily need to, or even really necessarily deserve to, just based on stuff that's happened in the past. And then the other thing is, if you don't want it to be a true crime podcast, why don't position it that way? You can just make this a history podcast if you're like uncomfortable with the genre. So I don't know. I don't want to like dwell on it, but it did seem, it's just like a strange off note. And, I think if you listen to, Connie Walker or Madeline Barron, or, you'd be like, why are you even saying this? Because that's been the focus of a bunch of really good podcasts that I think you'd want to compare yourself to.
I think maybe it follows up a little bit on the personal experience that Al brings to the beginning of the podcast, Kevin, because that is the opening scene, right? Where he talks about his growing up in Florida. And each episode of this does start with a big zoom out frame, right?
Right. And when he brings his personal experience, to me, doesn't feel like, just checking a box, an obligatory box of, I have to explain how why this means something to me. I did like the story about how he found out about this story, while covering a completely different assignment. And his whole talk about, I wanted to do it, and, it just, time just slipped away.
I pushed as hard as I could and kept checking in on the story from a distance, but ultimately, I lost touch with Glenda. And then life got in the way. I was swamped with work and raising kids, and Billy Joe's story just faded into the background.
Which is, as journalists, I think a lot of us can relate to, that you see a story and you kind of see the potential, but then other things come along, and while police have cold cases, reporters have cold cases too. And so the fact that he was able to, come back to it, I thought, I found that really interesting.
Laura, I could relate to that too. Sometimes you meet people and they tell you about, a story, and they're like, please do something about this. And in the moment you're like, yeah, I'm going to look into that. And then you don't. And it's like the sort of broken promise that you find yourself like, you have that whole pile of papers, ideas, and you look back on it and you're like, wow, I told that person I do that. And I told that person I do that. And then, and you could imagine, in this case, 8-10 years passes, like it probably feels like kind of a big broken promise, right?
Oh, yeah. But, and I'm sure that was some of the reluctance when he does go back in to, talk with Billy Joe's family members. And, you have I think it was the sister who had the police file, and at first she's not so keen on sharing it or even letting him look at the police file unless he's really there to help them. Because, you do have that big gap in the time from when he first heard about this to when he actually goes back. But, as somebody that's been doing this, like, and working in a community where, journalism for a long time, I do have a list like that, and I'm like, okay, these are stories that someday I want to tell. The time's not right now, but I can relate to that because there are things that have been on my list for years, and I'm like, I've always wanted to write this, and now I'm finally going to get the chance to do it. But in this case, where you're coming into, a case that has police investigation and forensics and witness statements, I feel like it's a little harder to go back because, memory is like that. And it is harder for people to recall some of these things. And also, I feel like over those years, that story does sort of take on a life of its own in a way in terms of theories that have been spawned about what people think actually happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one thing I kept thinking about when I first listened to the first episode of this was that I think before I really listening to the second and third episode, I kept thinking like anything could have happened. This, I think that I've changed my mind on it, but like this could have been an accident is the first thing I thought. But it still is a story because it has turned into a legend in the town. And like, why did it turn into a legend? And Toby, this is not a super long ago case. In fact, they have so many of the people that were involved. A lot of Billy Joe's friends, all of his family members, some of his one of his best friends is now a cop in another town. They have the person who did the autopsy. They have a lot of people who were witnesses who were there and a lot of tape. And one of the pieces of tape that really struck me were the football, local, like, what is it called? The sports announcer tapes, the play-by-play.
Tailback Billy Joe Johnson has rushed for nearly 3,000 yards in his first 2 years on the varsity squad.
Larry Shirley was the play-by-play announcer for the local radio station.
When you put the film in slow motion, everybody looks like they're running in slow motion except one guy, and that would be Billy Joe. He would look like normal speed.
And you sort of hear, because it's one thing to hear him described as this like local football star and have people say it, but it's another thing to hear it. It reminded me a lot of that O.J. Simpson documentary, how like everyone else is going in slow motion and he looks like, he's the only person running at full speed. And the dead endness of this town and how he seemed to be the only one who was going to get out. And that feels like so visceral. I mean, did you get that same sort of sense that like he was different than all the other kids in this town?
Yeah. And I think for me, in addition to that, it was, he was going to go to Auburn to play football. And Auburn, for people who don't follow college football or whatever, it's like one of the top programs in the country. Like when they talk about him having aspirations to play professional football, like going to play at Auburn is like a route to that. So it shows that it's not, a complete pipe dream. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things, which, I assume he'll get to at some point, but hasn't yet, is that, I think for, a teenage black, young man, being a football star is probably about as much social capital as you can get. Right. I mean, you're sort of a town hero, just, regardless of people's other sort of thoughts about racial things.
Kevin, the episodes 2 and 3 are set up with a historical moment, right? Mm-hmm. And somewhat lesser known historical moments, at least for me, especially the Jackson State shootings, which I knew very little about. What do you think of that, like giant zoom out historical setup? Then kind of going in, especially episode 2, I think starts out really far away and big. And then we end up at the end, like with this very investigative, in the case sort of ending to that episode. It gets in real tight to the case. Does that work for you?
Well, yeah, I think he continues trying to make the case about why the community would be distrustful of this report. And there are obviously certain... There are certain aspects of that history that are self-evident and don't really need to be explored because we just automatically know why. But to find a couple of things and then, zoom in, I think is, what's going to be the basis of it. Because a lot of this story is going to be, and already has been, that the family and their friends just find it very hard to believe that when a young man dies in a violent way in the presence of law enforcement, that they're dismissing a lot of the potential that the law enforcement officer had something to do with it.
Right.
Now we get the setup for actually, what tends to be a very difficult case or a very difficult premise to disprove, right? That that something else happened besides the gun going off, right? That it was an accident, or the setup's like, I guess it's plausible as unlikely.
Yeah.
But if you want to prove that the cop took his shotgun and stuck it in his mouth for some reason without a confession from that cop, that's hard to do. Right. So I think you have to. These are elements that I think are going to build upon. It's an 8-part series, so you don't put all your cards out at once. But we're starting to see, through these first 3 episodes, where it's going to go, and the idea that these 2 reporters are up against a hard thing something that's going to be hard to disprove. Right,
but they're certainly showing that the avenues were not explored. Mm-hmm. And Laura, they talk about like the Occam's razor thing, and I know that I'm going to say it wrong. We're probably get all sorts of tweets about how I said it wrong, but the most likely explanation is the one that is, true or whatever.
Yeah.
I hear young teenage boy dating a white girl in the Deep South pulled over after a pursuit by a cop after leaving her house, whose shotgun went off accidentally, during a traffic stop after he was pursued. That to me is not the most likely explanation of what happened to him. It just isn't. I will say the fact that, we all come to this conversation in 2021 with the point of view that we have, of course, our experiences being what they are. What do you think, just the very basic fact that this family had to sell fish plates and hire a lawyer in order to obtain the public record police file of what happened to their relative and his death in an ostensibly closed case?
Yeah, I think that was bullshit. That was ridiculous that they were having to have like the benefit fish fry to pay for the fee that they had to pay to the lawyer to get this case file. But, going back to the way this is laid out, I guess I feel like, going way back to this isn't a typical true crime podcast, the way that the story is being told now, I'm still having a hard time drawing a line toward feeling like there's going to be a satisfying conclusion to this in terms of an answer as to what actually happened. And I'm not saying that because I think this doesn't sound sketchy as hell, but it just seems like the wagons are circled and whatever really happened is never going to get out. So I feel like, are we setting ourselves up in a way to be disappointed because we aren't going to have that resolution that we're looking for with this? Because it does, you've got, yes, this traffic stop. You've got the fact that the police officer doesn't call for backup or anything like that, that, they're having a pursuit. And yet somebody that he's been pursuing, gets out of the vehicle and, it's not, a bigger scene than it just, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. But I guess I'm just having a hard time seeing how they're going to resolve this at this point after 3 episodes. Because to me, I feel like it's more a story of this larger issue of race in the South and how you are treated differently when violent crime occurs. The parents don't even get to identify the body, but the football coach does. So there are things like that, but it's just I don't remember that. So I don't know. I'm curious to see where it's going to go, I guess.
Laura, obviously we don't know what happened. We weren't there. Is it more likely that Billy Joe got out of his car after a pursuit, or that the cop asked him to get out of his car after a pursuit? If you hear what his friend, who's now a cop, says, it is more likely that the cop would ask him to get out of his car after a pursuit, right?
No, they would be like, get out. They would be like, put your hands on the wheel.
Correct.
Let me see you. Get out. Come out. You're keeping your hands in the air. Okay, lean over the hood of the car. Put your hands down. We're going to pat you down.
Right.
That is the scenario that would have played out. So, and I think, again, it's complicated. There's no cruiser cam. There's no other witnesses. So it's we have one narrative of what happened. And
do we know where his driver's license was Was it in his wallet when he was dead, or was it in the hands of the officer who says he was going to run it?
Didn't he say he was running his driver's license when the
Sure. Did he have the driver's license?
I don't know.
I mean, if it was still in his wallet, wouldn't that be important?
I mean, there are so many things that are just like the timeline being off, the girlfriend saying he knocked on the door for 5 minutes.
That's the weirdest part. Does anybody get that?
When he typically went to the trailer in the morning. I mean, there's so many strange things going on here that like just seem... they seem post-constructed. They seem that way in a very, I mean, I will say the pursuit, the story just seems, it just seems like it just seems that way. It just does not seem the way that would have gone, especially a teenage boy who knows what the landscape of being pulled over by the police looks like in 2008. We're not talking about something that happened in 1978. We're talking about 2008. Toby, I just want to talk about a couple of the scenes here because, you sent me a note about sort of the actual construction of the scenes, the writing of the scenes, but also the sort of metaphorical take on the scenes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I kind of feel like the writing seems more like a magazine type writing than it does podcast type writing. Like he does... he uses like these metaphors and, I think at one point he says something like,
standing in the sweltering heat of a Mississippi summer, I felt the history of this country like the humidity in the air. It was all around me. From the ghosts of the enslaved black people who worked the land, to the shadows cast by the trees, silent monuments to the victims of lynching, to right now.
That was a little unusual. And at times it felt a little audiobookish to me. But then he also has these like sort of beautiful scenes that I feel like are kind of metaphors in and of themselves. And we touched upon it a second ago, but there's the scene where Billy Joe, the crime scene.
Wallace is a black law enforcement officer. He knows exactly what the optics of this scene are. A black teen dead on the ground, a white police officer pulled him over. Most of the white people are inside the police line. Most of the black people are outside of it, cordoned off with no voice.
And the white people are on the inside of the police cordon, and the black people, including Billy Joe's parents, are on the outside. And that seems to me to get to the point that he's making in a sort of much more powerful way than in some of the writing, which again, I mean, it's good writing, but it's just funny to hear in a podcast because, like, even though people are reading scripts and stuff, I feel like most make more of a attempt to make it sound as though you're having a conversation. And if you can come up with those kind of metaphors on the fly, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's not really a real dig at it. I guess it's part of what he was talking about. It's just a different kind of podcast. And in this case, it's, the writing is a little more writerly and he's doing a little more reading rather than talking, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting that Al Letson was a poet before he was a journalist.
Well, there you go.
This is where it's worth making that note. Kevin, one thing that I said to you when we were listening to this, because we were listening to it at the same time, but separately on the airplane on the way back from our vacation, is that one thing of note, differentiator between this and a podcast like In the Dark, I don't think we've heard too many punchable people yet in this podcast, even the people who are necessarily like involved in the case that could be seen as adversarial, the person who did the first autopsy whose findings may have been wrong. They don't sound like necessarily bad actors, unreasonable people, unwilling to change their mind. Do you agree with that? Like, is that something that I found? Is that it's like, that seems like the approach here is not to go at them and say like, hey, well, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. It seems like, hey, what do you think of this?
Well, I think sometimes you get, you draw more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? And, these are a bunch of serious investigative journalists, right? And so, the idea, obviously like the coroner, she would be on her back foot if they come, out guns blazing. And in the end, they get her to kind of, very thoughtfully say, yeah, it might be worth, looking at again because of this or that evidence. Anytime like you have some conflict in any kind of story, right? I always put it to the James Bond villain. You have to believe that the villain can actually defeat James Bond. And so our setup here is that the system is up against Al, and JJ. And so right now, I mean, I think Laura said this in episode 3, it seems like, yeah, there's no way they're going to beat this. So at the end, if they are able to come up with something of significance, something that changes the narrative in a significant way, then that's going to be a really satisfying narrative, because it feels like there's no hope of that. So if in the end they provide some hope, that's great. If in the end it's, who's Billy Joe Johnson? He's all of us. If it's one of those Tim Kono endings, it's going to be really disappointing.
Yeah. We got some root talk though, right?
Yeah. And like root talk that wasn't just performative. Like,
good early morning root talk.
Yeah, again, trying to time out, how long it took to get from here to there. And
so that's where JJ and I start, at Billy Joe's trailer at 5:11 a.m.
All right, starting now.
Stopwatch starting.
We pull out and head towards the highway.
Proceed to the route.
It's early, so there isn't a lot of traffic.
Turn right onto Deep Creek Road.
I mean, one of the most interesting things, though, was that the police officer had lights on for, a mile and a half? That's, if that is true. Mm-hmm. And it can be, that's peculiar. Why wouldn't Billy Joe have pulled over? Maybe he pulled over as soon as they went on, but it wasn't a mile and a half back. I don't know. There is a lot, like you say, that's sketchy about it. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the official report is wrong. And so that's what they are up against. Right. And they've basically said that. So I don't want to sound like, another one of those townspeople who just like, it's...
this case is sus as hell. You know that it is.
Oh, yeah, it's sus as hell. It's sus as hell.
Yeah, I think that we all agree that this case is sus as hell.
Yeah, so we are really pulling for these journalists to come up with something other than the system sucks. But you already know the system sucks.
Yeah, yes. As Tucker Carrington being in this podcast proves, the system does actually suck. All right, well, I think we should do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out this new series from the PRX podcast, Reveal. That is how you find it. Go to the Reveal feed to look for the new series, Mississippi Goddam, reported by the Reveal host, Al Letson himself. Laura Bricker, what do you think? We're only 3 episodes in. Maybe we should perhaps revisit this later. Who knows? Thumbs up, thumbs down so far for Mississippi Goddam from Reveal.
So I'm going to go thumbs up, and I'm going to, talk about who I think would like this podcast, because I don't think it's for everybody. I think if you are looking for, and he admits this is not a typical true crime podcast in the sense of the way it's set up. This, to me, is more of a larger study of race and crime in the South and old habits and old practices among law enforcement. And if you want a story that's going to take a case and put it in that larger context and sort of examine it in a way that's very reflective and drawn out, this is a podcast for you. If you're looking for a little bit more straightforward crime recap moving along, this is not the podcast for you.
Toby Ball.
So I feel like a lot of times I give things thumbs up and I have like a lot of trepidation about whether it's going to turn out, like the ending's going to turn out well. So in this case, I'm kind of doing the opposite. I basically like the first few episodes, although I'm a little lukewarm on them. I have more confidence that the remainder of the series is going to be good. Just because I don't know. I kind of feel as though the storytelling is strong enough that they would, be building to something. So with that piece of confidence in mind, I'll give it a thumbs up. I plan on listening to at least a few more episodes, which again is not something I do all the time. I think the story is interesting. I mean, we're back in Mississippi, right? So taking a look at that system, I think it's interesting. So yeah, thumbs up.
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm also going thumbs up, but also sort of with that caveat, maybe we were listening to it too soon in the narrative to get a real feel for it. But the storytelling is strong. It's an interesting case. And sort of what kind of tips their hand here is that Reveal, that does investigative stories all the time, felt the need to make an 8-part series out of this particular story. So it kind of signals to me that there's going to be, that there ought to be a big finish to this. But I do feel like they're not going to be able to land the plane because it just seems such a hard task to accomplish. So if they can, then it's like a super thumbs up.
Yeah.
It sort of signals that we're going in a direction for a really satisfying podcast. But where we are at this moment, we're kind of left in limbo as we see the pieces being put together.
Yep.
Let's see when you turn over all the cards where we are. But thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm going to give this a big thumbs up. And I will say a little part of my thumbs up here is underscored by my bias for this team. The Reveal team has won so many awards for so many of their series, including a series called American Rehab, which came out a year or two ago, which won just like pretty much every journalism award in the world. And, you know, Al, I don't think is the kind of host, and I don't think this is the kind of team that would say, hey, let's just do a project because it would be fun. So that is sort of underscoring a big part of my big thumbs up here. But also, I think there is something, as Toby said, that I don't typically love, but I do love it here because I think the right person is doing it. The sort of poetic nature of this and the way that it's written and constructed feels different to me. The episodes are, you know, the sort of the intentional zoom in is really lovely. What I really love that feels urgent and new to me is the inclusion of all of these voices that were present at the time. You know, we're not bringing in, you know, cold analysts from 10,000 miles away as the primary sources in the podcast. We got like Billy Joe's best friend. We've got like Billy Joe's, you know, other best friend who's now a coach at the high school where he used to go. You know, we have his sister, his parents. We have the person who performed his autopsy. I really think we've got a lot here, and I've heard enough voices that were present at the time that I feel the story is going somewhere already. So I really like it.
It gets the award for the longest title, right?
I mean,
Goddam. No, it's Reveal. Mississippi Goddam. The Ballad of Billy Joe Johnson.
Yeah, lots of words there to scroll across my screen. So yeah, big thumbs up for me so far, and I am going to continue listening. And you know what? If it goes the other way, I will proudly come out and say so on the podcast. So big thumbs up for me so far for Mississippi Goddam from Reveal.
Hi, I'm Jim Perdue of Perdue Chicken. Unlike our competitor, who's gone back to feeding their chickens antibiotics, we at Perdue will remain no antibiotics ever. No antibiotics ever because we raise our chickens in a healthy environment, so they don't need them. No antibiotics ever takes more time and money, but it's the right thing to do. So when you buy chicken, look for the Perdue label to make sure your chicken is no antibiotics ever. Get the facts at Perdue.com.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
All right, Kevin, here we are in the business section.
Business section.
I know you don't have much of a voice, so I'm going to spare you a lot of talk. What do we got going on our Patreon today, Kevin?
The Crime Writers on After Show. We're going to talk about our trip to Mexico.
And the things that we watched and listened to, including a thing that Toby made me watch that I want to debrief with him real quick.
What was it?
It was a weird thing about Dune. It was wild. It was totally wild and very in the vein of something Toby would like. And I want to give him feedback about a thing that he told me to watch. And I also want to talk a little bit about my journey finishing Dead on Deadline by Laura Bricker. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're going to be doing all the talking.
What else have we got, Kevin?
Well, we have a new episode this week coming out of Married with Podcast. We're going to be answering a question from someone who has some concerns about the way her daughter's new boyfriend is engaging with their younger child.
Yeah.
So,
I have some concerns too.
Yeah, well, I think it's warranted. Laura Bricker's already out with the latest Leave It to Bricker, where she's exploring the secret caves and tunnels of her quaint town of Exeter, New Hampshire.
And that's not a metaphor. They are literally caves and tunnels.
They're little caves and tunnels. And lastly, on Wednesday evening, Toby will be recording the new episode of Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club, postponed from the previous week. And if you are a member of Crime Writers on Nation, you can watch that live taping, even take part. Toby, remind us again, the book and your guests.
It's called Beast in View by Margaret Millar. And it's going to be with Alex Segura and Kimberly from Date with Dateline.
I just want to let you know, Toby, I finished A Line to Kill, so I'm ready for my episode of Deep Dive. I'm ready.
That's 2 month from now. So
I'm gonna have to read it again.
I hope you took a lot of
Damn
notes
it.
so you remember what to say.
Didn't take a single note. I'm going to have to listen to it again.
All right. It'll be even better the second time.
All right, Kevin. And I should say, for anyone who's interested in all of our goings-on, including all the behind-the-scenes going on, here at Crime Writers On, sign up for our newsletter at crimewriterson.com. It's free, and it is awesome.
You know what's special about this week?
What's special about this week?
New merch.
New merch, what do we got?
Okay, it's because of the success
Yes.
of the previous Crime Writers On leggings.
Yes, which are still available, by the way.
Yes.
And selling like hotcakes.
We have.
Yep, there we go.
We have a new set of leggings. They are the Lara Rowe.
Lara Rowe?
Yes, Lara Rowe leggings.
Special Lara Bricker edition, Lara Rowe leggings?
Special Lara. Yeah, so if you want Laura Bricker's cartoon face.
All over your legs?
And your butt. Absolutely.
Yeah, Lara Rowe. I wore my Crime Writers On leggings at the airport. I wore my Crime Writers On leggings in Mexico. I saw Rabia Chaudhry wearing her Crime Writers On leggings on Twitter. They are selling like hotcakes. They are like butter, and they are amazing. Keep that link to the Crime Writers On leggings in the newsletter. They're amazing. They're amazing. All right, Kevin, to give you a break from having to use your voice anymore, I'm going to announce our Patreon patron saints of this week. Is that okay?
Excellent.
They are Claire Cantwell and Kristen Williams. Bless you. And thanks for supporting us on Patreon, everyone. Go head on over to patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. And thus ends the business section. Moving on.
Tell me exactly what happened.
My daughter's passed out. Please get here quick, please.
Okay. All right, we're going to.
The sudden death in 2009 of actress Brittney Murphy shocked Hollywood. She had gone from child star to it girl with roles in films like Clueless and 8 Mile. When the 32-year-old collapsed at home in the presence of her mother and husband, tabloid speculation began.
The chatter among us was overdose. I mean, it seemed like the only logical thing for someone that young in Hollywood. Brittney had changed physically, noticeably. She was much thinner. We thought, well, she went too far.
There were red flags in Brittney's marriage to the much older screenwriter Simon Monjack. She had ignored his reputation as a grifter and found herself personally and professionally isolated as Monjack controlled every part of her life.
If it wasn't for Simon Monjack, there's every chance Brittney Murphy would still be alive. And it ultimately is like a very banal story. It really isn't a huge mystery. It's just very simple. A predator targeting someone at their most vulnerable. It was the perfect storm.
The HBO Max 2-part series, What Happened, Brittney Murphy, recalls the actor's Hollywood climb and subsequent fatal backslide during her marriage to a gold-digging Svengali. It also features true crime talking heads who don't believe the official cause of death and traffic and innuendo. We are going to be talking about plot points for What Happened, Brittney Murphy. So to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. Now, Laura, we do have a very classic sort of true crime setup here to what ends up kind of being like an almost like hybrid Hollywood tell-all / true / in-depth documentary. Really kind of a hybrid piece of media here. What do you think of the setup going into this?
Well, I liked the initial setup where we go in and it starts right off with like a 911 call. So we start, with the action right up front with her mother calling 911. She's stopped breathing. You're hearing, sort of the emotion that's part of that moment, the response that's happening at that moment. And, then we have these sort of scenes that are put through, kind of superimposed there of like films that Brittney Murphy was in. And, then there's like a clip of Marilyn Monroe. So the setup felt, I felt like that was a good lead in. I felt like, though, as it continued with these sort of, scenes, I was amazed at the amount of footage they could find of Brittney Murphy in various films that was so parallel to all of the dysfunction and sadness that happened in the end of her life. And I felt like that got a little exploitive.
Yeah, because let's face it, Toby, she was playing characters in movies. These were not actually parallels to her own life that she was portraying in these films. She was being paid as an actress to play characters in movies like Girl Interrupted, like Clueless, like 8 Mile, and they were using scenes from films to illustrate what real people were saying was happening in her real life. I didn't like that part of this film. In a film, which I should say, otherwise, I was surprised by how much I did like. That I was not a fan of. What did you think about that?
I cringed every time. And it gets even worse as it goes on, as her life kind of spirals. And they're showing clips from, I can't even remember what the name is, but there's one where I think she's like in prison or something, and she's got some secret, and she's got this makeup that makes her look really gaunt, and she's like freaking out. And it just seemed way, way, way off for what you should do. And then there's even a point at which they have her in a movie saying that she feels like she's about to die or something. And they cue that up with her actually dying. So I don't know who came up with that idea, but it wasn't a great idea to begin with. And then when they saw how it actually played out, I can't believe that there wasn't somebody who was like, maybe we should just not do this. Because for me, it was like really uncomfortable most of the time, and just didn't seem like, if you're actually trying to honor her, I think showing her acting the way she's acting in these sort of, late sort of B-level movies is not really a very good way of honoring her life as a way of portraying like the obvious difficulties that she was having.
Well, I will say that's different to me. So I actually didn't mind so there's one thing to show like when she was having troubles in her life and, sort of what happened to her career. I mean, it's one thing to show, the movies near sort of the end of her career when, we're talking about her decline and seeing that, she had been in these A-level movies, and then, that one movie where she was almost let go. And seeing those cuts and the behind the scene or not being able to remember her lines, that's different, I think, than seeing her in Girl Interrupted talking about wanting to die when she wasn't mentally healthy. I mean, there's a difference there, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I actually liked the clips. I don't know why. I just felt like they went along with sort of what was going on in her life. I certainly didn't read it as sort of being prescient about, where her life was going, but it also served the purpose of re-emphasizing the breadth of her dramatic work, because I certainly, looking back, didn't think of, Brittney Murphy as having like any kind of gravitas, right?
Really?
No, yeah. That she was, this, on her way to being an A-list actress or anything. And now
she was an A-list actress, yeah.
Was she though?
Yeah, for a time she was.
Okay, all right. See, I don't remember her that way, but I can certainly see, part of like why that career path was, maybe diverted, and that's the reason why I don't see her that way. She was obviously in some great movies, had some great roles. I guess she is a little quirky, but look, I didn't think I was going to like this documentary, but I kind of did.
Yeah, I did too. But there was one other part that I really hated, and I think that Laura hated too, and I'm guessing Toby may have hated, because it was provided without context. Very much like the Cecil Hotel documentary, provided it without context.
Yeah.
We saw these gross YouTubers like, let's talk about Brittney Murphy's death while you watch me put on my makeup.
Oh, I want to poke them in the eye with their mascara.
I fucking hated them. Oh my God.
Why do you just want to settle for, she died of pneumonia? Oh, well, it just doesn't make sense.
Her death was not accidental, and her husband's was not accidental. I believe they both were targeted.
I think that their autopsies were forged.
Something happened. Someone must have bribed someone.
I mean, I'm guessing, Laura, the point of that was to illustrate how gross it is, right? That the internet is speculating about Brittney Murphy's death and all these conspiracy theories. We're not told or even signaled in any way that that's the point. And I'm not saying like I'm stupid and like I needed that signal.
Yeah.
But I'm smart. But there was so the opposite of signaling that for the whole first episode of this, I'm like, why the hell are we even being forced to watch these people? Did you have that same feeling?
Yes. And I was just like, I felt like we had good voices to talk about her. And, we had the woman that worked with her. I can't remember. Was it King of the Hill?
Kathy Najimy?
Yeah. So we had some good voices to talk about her. that actually could like add some context that was helpful and helped bring the story together. And then we have these YouTubers who I hated, and I understood why they were there, but I guess show them once. You do not need to keep showing them. Like, they are actually a credible source of information. I mean, I felt like, oh, look, it's these stupid YouTubers again. Like, no, we're done with these people. Why are you cheapening this show and this documentary by continuing to put them in there with no context as if they were actually authorities on what happened? But I mean, and it's just, it was crazy. And I got the point, but I feel like less is more here. We don't need to keep seeing these people. Toby agrees.
Well,
do you agree, Toby?
I sort of do. Like, I think they got too much airtime. I do. The only thing that, and they didn't connect the dots, and maybe they didn't need to, but in the end, when you find out what happened, and it's so kind of, it has nothing to do with any of that stuff, that I feel as though it was a sort of, you know, a pretty stark rebuttal to what they were saying. I mean, it kind of exposes them. And then there's that weird little moment where they show one of them, and then they quickly flip to Brittney Murphy in one of her movies, like giving the finger to the camera, which I guess that was them connecting the dots. It was also like super weird in my opinion, but
there was also a clip, Toby, not to interrupt, Toby, there was also a clip from one of the movies where she says, "Why don't you just let me die?
Can't you just let me die?"
Oh yeah,
which I think is you know, directed at, you know, those talking heads, right?
Yeah, but again, I don't like what Rebecca was saying. Like, I thought actually some of the clips of her on set as she was having problems were, you know, sort of revealing and stuff and interesting. It was really just the clips from the finished movies that they were using to kind of show. And I'm sorry, these movies are not trying to portray something close to reality. Like, they're entertainments. And so having her with like all this dark makeup under her eyes and looking super gaunt and crazy, as being illustrative of her like actual real world problems, to me was kind of putting a cartoony face on it rather than something that was kind of realistic, which I think was far better illustrated by like the conditions of her house, which, you know, I think pointed towards some like huge dysfunction. I mean, that, you know, it was like a rich person's, you know, hoarding house, you know, it's just stuff everywhere.
You know, I think the difference between using those YouTubers in Hotel Cecil and this one is that they both use them in a way that make us really have disdain for them.
Yeah.
I think the difference with Hotel Cecil is in the end, the clips that they were using were taken out of context, that a lot of those people were summarizing the case.
They were supposed to be good guys.
And at the very end, we hear them talking about how, no, it was all conspiracy theory. Where in this case, you know, I think that we're supposed to, on the face, you know, believe that, you know, that they're vapid.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're going to talk about true crime while I do my makeup.
Oh, my God.
Because that's the format of my YouTube thing. But there's this really unlikely connection between these two reviews.
Yeah.
Which is that they both deal with a death investigation and an autopsy whose results are not nefarious. And in both cases, you have groups that don't believe them.
Right.
And in the first case, there seems to be a historical context.
It's sus as hell.
You know, that, well, they're both sus as hell if you look at them a certain way, right? So in one, there's, you know, the stakes are different. There is a historical context, which makes us distrust that result. In this one, as banal as it really is, you know, the question is, did you actually die of pneumonia? The larger question is, how could that happen in this day and age, and why didn't people do something that really, this was preventable? But you also have this case where now you've got this group of people, you know, who may say it in a, you know, a rather, you know, in a rather dramatic way, but they don't believe that either. And you can see where those two stories sort of verge from there, but that's an unusual parallel between the two of them.
Toby, I think one of the reasons why the flaws in this stick out so much is because the sourcing in it is so surprisingly amazing. They have Kathy Najimy, famous actress, Amy Heckerling, who made Clueless, really famous movie writer, director, by the way. Clueless is one of my all-time favorite movies. If it's not one of yours, fair listener, don't at me. Taryn Manning, another great, really well-known actress, Orange is the New Black, also one of her co-stars in 8 Mile. We have her agent. We have her childhood best friend. We have multiple journalists. We have the coroner who performed her autopsy. Mm-hmm. We have 2 very famous Hollywood gossip columnists, Ted Casablanca and Perez Hilton. We have Simon's mother and brother. We have Simon's ex. We have really like the sources top to bottom in this, all the way up and down, which is surprising to me. Like, this was a very earnestly made film, well sourced. Were you surprised to see so many heavy hitters in this, what is essentially like a Hollywood tragedy biopic, Toby?
I'll confess to, first of all, not recognizing that some of these people were heavy hitters.
Have you ever seen Clueless, Toby?
No. But but I tell you, I thought, what's her name? Amy Heckerling?
Yeah.
I thought she was amazing. Like, she was super, super interesting. I felt like just about everybody else said what I was expecting them to say. Like, I feel like they had all these people who were the right people to talk to, but nobody really had much insight beyond sort of the obvious arc of the story. You know, in the end, I kept waiting. I'm like, is somebody going to like tell me something that I couldn't have like written for them in a script just based on what little I know? And it was Amy Heckerling. And then there was a story that the guy told about being at that dinner with Simon Monjack before he was with Brittney, and he was talking about how he was a billionaire and he had that shark fin treatment and he collects Ferraris or whatever. And he's like, it turned out it was all a lie.
One of the ways that Simon legitimized those lies was by bringing a lovely girl into the equation. That was the cloak. And it was perfect because she believed the lies too. So he lived off this girl that had worked her heart out for every penny she had.
Like, that guy, like, he had that interview and he comes on a little bit later. Like, he was kind of interesting. I think almost everybody else said some aspect of watching her, like, go from being this bright, kind of quirky, like, not completely Hollywood, you know, very kind person, and then, you know, meet Simon Monjack after some, you know, heartache, and then going into this spiral. And I guess the other person who was kind of interesting was the coroner, who's kind of, well, there's 2 coroners, right? I mean, there's like bad coroner who's like, you know, thinks he's Quincy and, you know, he's suspicious of this, that, and the other thing. And then there's the woman coroner who's just kind of like, yeah, well, you know, you can say that, but when I actually did the autopsy, there weren't mushroom spores, you know. When I did the autopsy, you know, I cut off pieces of her lung and they sank. So I thought there was a lot of sort of, you know, the old sound and fury signifying nothing. Like, they had a lot of good interviews, but not a whole lot came out of them.
Yeah. Toby, Clueless is a modern day Jane Austen retelling Emma Pride and Prejudice situation. You must watch it immediately. Amy Heckerling is an incredible writer-director.
Can we just say how, like, young Jeremy Sisto looked then and how old he looks now?
Can we talk about how
Paul Rudd looks exactly the same?
Exactly the same. Yeah. No change at all. All right, Laura, let's talk a little bit about what happened here, because the pneumonia thing is weird. It is. Yeah. I mean, we had a very straightforward explanation for Brittney's death. She was starving. She was using lots of substances, in which, by the way, you know, as somebody who's known plenty of people with eating disorders, using lots of substances and eating disorders sometimes do go together, and Hollywood and all that stuff kind of piled in. She's living with somebody very controlling. They obviously had mental health issues. They were living basically like hoarders when you see their house. And she was sick and wasn't being treated for it, right? Is it very strange, though, that he also died of pneumonia later, a few months later? I mean, obviously, when the mold thing came up, I was like, oh, that's it. But that wasn't it. It's a very strange sort of set of circumstances on its face. You do kind of understand at least why some of the speculation arose, right?
Yeah. And, I think, though, that I guess my question is, did we actually learn anything that we didn't know before about what happened to both of these people? Like, why are we hearing this now? What happened to Brittney? This happened in 2009. I mean, this is a while ago. So this isn't new information. But I feel like they missed a bit of an opportunity to take a deeper dive into this culture of Hollywood that allowed somebody to get to this point because of the way that they are, talking about how she looks, and she has to look like this if she wants to get more parts in the movie. And really, I would feel, just in watching this, I guess my sense is that her self-esteem is just being eroded. And then she gets hooked up with this Simon, who's totally controlling, clearly got issues. And the fact that they both die in the same way, I think, is just sort of indicative of the dysfunction that dominated their relationship in terms of living in this house where there was clearly, like you said, a hoarding situation going on, abusing prescription drugs. There's clearly a very strange dynamic with Simon and her mother after she dies. So I think it's just the bigger picture of this, drug abuse, mental illness that permeated this relationship. And in hindsight, it's probably not surprising that he died the same way. But I mean, when you're doing your makeup on YouTube, I mean, I'm sure, you could come up with something.
Kevin, we do meet Simon's ex here. Mm-hmm. And we do hear, as Toby said, from this other guy who was duped by him, very clear, he's very fucking good at what he does.
Yeah, he I think, was the most interesting part of the documentaries. If somebody that you didn't know was kind of in the shadows, and, his reputation as a grifter, was pretty well known already in Hollywood. And so that character study and the look at, the dynamics of their relationship, why she was looking for love. And, you might say it's the daddy issue thing. It's a, pop psychology analysis, but, other people seem to back that up. It's because it's obvious that, it wasn't like a John Belushi case where she just overdosed on a bunch of cocaine. It was the controlling, slowly destructive nature of that relationship, which was her physical undoing. So that part was really interesting. I keep thinking about the title because it's What Happened, Brittney Murphy.
Not What Happened to Brittney Murphy.
Or What Happened, Brittney Murphy. Right? So they're posing the question, it seems, to Brittney Murphy.
Which is weird.
Right? So is she answering the question herself? Like, is her life answering the question of her death? These are the little side things we always talk about on Crime Writers On. I don't know really where they're going with that. What are they trying to say?
I almost felt like his ex was kind of the heart of the film and that she was buried a little bit in the back.
I don't know if she's the heart of the film about Brittney Murphy.
Well, she's the heart of the part about Simon, right?
She had some interesting, important context.
Because she's clearly, it reminded me a lot of like the Dirty John, Dr. Death 3 kind of conversations we've had.
Simon tearfully told me one night after I would not make love with him that he had spinal cancer and that he was going to have to go to have this shark cartilage treatment in Monaco. So, of course, I break down because the love of my life has cancer. I find out all of a sudden and everything changes. And then we have sex.
So he got what he wanted.
He got what he wanted.
It proves that someone is really freaking great at being a grifter when he can attract these very well-to-do, very normal, very successful, very smart people, dupe them, and they can still be sad about it years later, even though they know he's a bad actor, right?
Tell them they got spinal cancer so they can get sex.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, she basically said he sexually assaulted her like over and over again, and his mother is defending him. He obviously still has his mother, in his thrall, even though he died.
Well, I think the mother seemed to be pretty wide-eyed and sober about who he was.
Somewhat for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's another sort of case. And Laura, to your comment about Brittney's mother, I don't think their dynamic was weird. I think he was controlling her as well. I mean, I just think he's good at it, right?
Yeah. Well, it was weird when you saw it on Larry King, I think. But I think that was just a really bizarre window into this world after she died.
Yeah. And Toby, just one quick last thing. Isn't it not in his interest to screw her career over when what it is he's really after is money?
Yeah, that whole thing was weird. I mean, I think asking him to act logically based on everything else we know about him is probably a little bit much. But you can see, like, he wants to control her up into a point where it starts to be a problem. And I don't think he understood where that line was. But the one director's story about how I went outside and said loudly enough for him to hear that they're going to have to get somebody to replace her. And then he came up and was like, no, man, we'll make this work. I mean, I just don't think he understood or was capable of kind of understanding sort of the limits or the the way in which his exercise of his sort of power over her was alienating to other people.
Well, I think we should do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out the 2-part series, What Happened, Brittney Murphy? It's on HBO Max, and it's about the life and death of actress Brittney Murphy. Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this documentary?
Oof. This is one of those times I wish I could bring back like a thumb sideways because,
You can't.
I can't.
We've been
I
doing
can?
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going thumb sideways on this because, I watched it. It didn't take that. I mean, it was like 2 episodes and I watched it all at once. And I was like, okay. If you didn't know a lot about how Brittney Murphy died and you watch this, you're gonna get up to speed. But I feel like it's sort of the title, What Happened to Brittney? Like, didn't we already know what happened to Brittney when this documentary started? So like that wasn't a big mystery. Like the information came out back in 2009. And I think they did miss an opportunity. It's kind of very similar to that Britney Spears documentary we watched where, you have these young women and the effect of Hollywood on them when they have some underlying mental illness. And, I think there could have been like maybe a deeper picture of that. And there was, but overall, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. That's where I'm at this.
Toby Ball.
Yeah. So, I mean, Brittney Murphy, like it really, I agree with Kevin. It seems like it's more sort of about Simon Monjack and his effect on Brittney Murphy and all that. He actually reminds me a little bit of Ian Bailey from West Cork. Another sort of self-mythologizing, manipulative guy. I'm sort of a moderate thumbs down. I just feel like for this story, which we've heard before, not Brittney Murphy in particular, but controlling white dudes, there's just better stuff out there that you can listen to. I thought some of it was sort of borderline offensive, and then parts of it were kind of interesting. I mean, it's not a disaster, but I don't feel like I can really recommend it.
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm a mild thumbs up. I did not think this was going to be substantive. I'd heard some stuff about it being very exploitive. The opening scene with the 911 call probably was a little too intimate, but beyond that, I found it very interesting. As someone's, career that I thought I knew about, but I didn't. It's not a true crime in the traditional sense, but as far as, looking at a bad relationship that contributed to a fatal outcome, I also found that kind of interesting. So I think for some folks that are not looking for maybe, the staircase, but, looking for a story that is still compelling, I'd say, go for it.
I'm going to give it a mild thumbs up, too. I will warn listeners that there are some exploitative parts. I do think the use of some of the film clips in this is exploitative. I do not like Perez Hilton's apology tour. I think the guy just needs to stop it. We get it. You're on an apology tour, Perez Hilton, but we get it. Just stop doing the apology tour thing. I think it's worth watching for Amy Heckerling's interview, for Kathy Najimy's interview, for Taryn Manning's interview, and for all the journalists and sources we hear here. That is the strongest part of the film, and that, for me, is why it tips the scales. If you can sort of close one eye during the more exploitative parts and really listen to the interviews and the profile of Simon, the bad doer here. I do think there's something to learn here from these con men stories, only because we have a history of blaming women, a history of blaming victims for these stories. And as Toby pointed out, this very smart female coroner did this very straightforward autopsy. No one frickin' believed her either. So if nothing else, the canon of believing women needs to be built upon. So mild thumbs up for me for What Happened, Brittney Murphy.
Hi, I'm Jim Perdue of Perdue Chicken. Unlike our competitor, who's gone back to feeding their chickens antibiotics, we at Perdue will remain no antibiotics ever. No antibiotics ever because we raise our chickens in a healthy environment, so they don't need them. No antibiotics ever takes more time and money, but it's the right thing to do. So when you buy chicken, look for the Perdue label to make sure your chicken is no antibiotics ever. Get the facts at Perdue.com.
The friendship is sharing deal. Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
Now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of the week. Wise men say only fools steal a bust of Elvis from a West Peoria saloon. The owner of Jimmy's says someone thought, quote, "it's now or never," and walked off with their bust of the king, which has sat on the bar for 15 years, right next to the straws and napkins. The statuette of Elvis was obtained at a garage sale for $20. They also have a jar of those like weird pickled eggs. Jimmy Spears didn't want to bother police with the theft, but his Facebook post caught the attention of the local paper. He's asking that hound dog, don't be cruel and please return to sender. Panel, it looks like Elvis has left the building. Where is the king now? Laura Bricker, what do you think?
I think it should surprise nobody that Elvis is in Exeter, New Hampshire. In fact, I met him here once. He's allegedly dead now, the Elvis I met, but I don't know. He might not actually be dead. He might be hiding in one of the subterranean tunnels that I am investigating, and perhaps I will find him there.
Toby Ball, what do you think? Where is the king now?
I was thinking the statuette's it's got to be sitting on somebody's toilet tank, right?
What do you think, Kevin?
Well, he's down at the end of Lonely Street at the Heartbreak Hotel.
You don't think he's like in the peanut butter, banana, and bacon section at the grocery store?
He might be posing for a portrait in velvet.
He's not wearing a cape down there at the cape store?
Forgot to mention, is it young Elvis or old Elvis?
we didn't hear that.
You guys have a cape store in Hopkinton?
Yeah, we do.
What?
We should probably end it on that note, but before we do, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We have a really great ad for a cat, and this comes to us from Regina Lee, who knows I love the orange tabbies, and so the subject is Orange Tabby up for grabs in Los Angeles, and here is the ad. Does anyone want my cat? You're probably wondering, why would you want to give your cat away? Well, let me tell you, I don't like him. We've known each other for 15 years, and I think I've seen enough. He's not nice to me or my kids. Maybe he'll be nice to you. I'm evolved enough to recognize the problem could lie with me, which is why I want you to rescue him from me. He deserves to be happy. I certainly do. I think our relationship has run its course when your therapist says, "And how did things go with your cat this week?" It's not that he's a bad cat and there are no bad animals. He's just an asshole. But he's not bad. Not in a conventional serial killer way. Just like in a you shouldn't date that person kind of way. So thank you, Regina. The 15-year-old tabby, I'm not going to take him because he does sound like an asshole, but maybe someone out in Los Angeles might.
Well, I hope he has a good home until he gets a new home and he doesn't just, find himself without a home because that's no good.
No.
But it is nice of this person to look for a good match for the cat that they hate.
She wants to divorce her cat after 15 years.
She does. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it just doesn't work out. All right, Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you to find a new home for their orange cat that they don't like, how can they find you on Twitter?
They can find me at Laura Bricker.
And Toby Ball, folks want to reach out to you, how can they find you on Twitter?
At Toby Ball and H.
Kevin Flynn, how can folks find you and wish you better health next week?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show at Crime Writers On, and I encourage you to join our incredible community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook group. We also have a regular old Facebook page. Just look for the page and then click Join the Group. Support the show at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media, and you'll get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the very handsome Olivia Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Yoga Loft above the Bodega in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement, where Kevin and I practice our dance moves to Rollin' with the Homies.
That's a clueless reference, Toby, just in case you didn't know. Yeah.
On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. That was really good, Kevin.
So yeah, that's another sort of interesting aspect of this. Full stop.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm not, morning is not my moment.
No. Totally fine. Totally fine.
Partners in Crime Media.
Hi, I'm Jim Perdue of Perdue Chicken. Unlike our competitor, who's gone back to feeding their chickens antibiotics, we at Perdue will remain no antibiotics ever. No antibiotics ever because we raise our chickens in a healthy environment, so they don't need them. No antibiotics ever takes more time and money, but it's the right thing to do. So when you buy chicken, look for the Perdue label to make sure your chicken is no antibiotics ever. Get the facts at Perdue.com.